Hey, party people, and welcome Patreon. Hey, how you doing? I am coming in here live because I'm testing this feature and making sure that it is working the way that I want it to. And so, uh, let me welcome to. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, and so yeah, so coming in here testing these features, and I was like, I called this "Pioneers Ask Questions" because we do, and pioneers have to ask questions. So I want to make sure. Yes, I've already shared that. All right, great. And then let me make sure that it is showing up over here. Okay, it looks like it is. All right. So I think everything is where it's supposed to be. So I'm excited about that. So hey y'all, hey, welcome to the this is not the podcast, but I just wanted to come in here because I wanted to give you guys like some updates. So because you're a part of the Patreon, and what is going on, and that is the question. And I said pioneers ask questions because I was in a meeting earlier today, and somebody asked me why I was interested in doing something. So I'm going to I'll share with y'all later some of the things that I have coming up. But in that meeting, they asked me why was I doing this? And I said, why was I interested in this? And I said, well, it's because I kept asking questions, right? I kept asking questions. So from a leadership standpoint, my background, as you all know, is in leadership development. And I say now that what I really do, I consider myself a leader development professional. Leadership development and leader development are two different things. Leadership development, the ship is important because the ship is about the relationship between the leader and the people or processes that they lead and how to make that smoother, better, work more efficient. The leader development is about developing that individual leader in whatever space they're in. And so the whole idea of pioneer, right, is and the hey pioneer, it's really coming from the underpinnings of leader development and leader development theory and leader development evidence and leader development empirical review and leader development anecdotal experience and all of that. And so it's like, yeah, so pioneers, we have to ask questions. And so anyway, I digress. Going back to my conversation, I said, well, I'm interested in this because I kept asking the question, well, what if? I wonder how this would happen. How did I get into this whole space of pioneer from leadership development to leader development to, hey, I'm talking to pioneers? How did I make that transition? It's because I kept asking questions. I kept asking questions because I kept seeing patterns. And so the patterns that I kept seeing was the first pattern that I saw that took me from leadership to that was really inside of leadership was like, hey, everybody has these leaders. People are trying to develop leaders, but the way people are trying to develop leaders, especially in corporate settings, the way people are trying to develop leaders in corporate settings really is just turning people off of leadership. What if we could do something differently about that? And not just throw more money into leadership development programs, right? Like, what if we could do something different? What if we looked at it differently? And that's where I started studying management and, who the founders of our modern day management system were. And and that's why John Maxwell, became such a popular voice because he popularized the difference between management and leadership. And so just again asking more questions. And so as I started talking about, well, what would make this person a better leader, I asked more questions about, well, what if we integrated your faith into this? What would that look like? Your spiritual beliefs, what would that look like? More questions that opened up more doors, that opened up an opportunity to have a unique voice. And then as I started asking about, well, what would your faith look like from the individual standpoint, I started asking, well, what would faith look like? How can we use a group instead of an individual? Because what I found was while I was talking to the leader, the leader was having this burden of feeling like the super saint, like you had to be saved for your entire organization, and that spiritually you had to carry the whole organization. I was like, that's not the way business was intended. Business was not intended to be carried by a solo person. Business was intended to be shared. And so if we can share the responsibilities of business, like there are different departments in business, if we can share the responsibilities of business practically, then surely we should be able to share the responsibilities of business spiritually. And that's where I ended up landing. Like, how can we share this responsibility, spiritually share this responsibility in a way that is effective for the people? So that was the last question. So I say this because pioneers, you're going to ask questions, and the questions that you ask are going to lead to more questions. Now, before we get up in arms about that, I totally get it, because it's like, well, I've asked all these questions and I have questions and all I have is questions. Well, that's a good thing, because when you land upon the right question, it will open up doors that you didn't know before. It will open up pathways. It will open up invitations that you hadn't experienced before. So I'm going to say, pioneer, you have to ask good questions. And that's why Pray the Kingdom Way. Oh, it's over here. There it is. That's why I'm Pray the Kingdom Way. I have ask prompts, because asking questions of the Lord, asking questions of yourself, asking questions of others is going to give you information. And asking questions of the Lord is going to give you also information. It's going to open up. Even if when you're asking questions, the only answers that you're getting are more questions. Okay. I want to encourage you to resist being frustrated that you have more questions than answers. Here's what you do if you have more questions than answers. Two things. Number one, first thing you do is you list all the questions that you have. If you're like, I have more questions than answers, sometimes that's an emotional response because we're kind of frustrated and overwhelmed. And so I'm going to ask you, okay, great. List all the questions that you have. List all the questions that you have. That's number one. You list them all so that they're not just floating around in your head as some celestial or esoteric cloud of weight, right? So celestial or esoteric weight just floating around in your head, on your shoulders. List your questions, okay? And then go away. So I'm going to give you to these in a couple of steps. I said it was going to be two, but step one, list your questions. Step two, go away from the list. Because once you get all the questions down, the swell of the questions is going to be very prominent and very right in your face. And so I want you to go away for a couple of days, for some time period. Do something that gets your mind off those questions. Do something that will get you into a fun state. Do something that will relax you to get your mind off those questions, because that is important for you to separate the volume of overwhelm for the processing that's going to come later. All right. All right. So first thing, list the questions. Second thing, go away. Stop looking at the questions. Go do something fun so that you're not emotionally flooded, so that you can calm down a little bit, so that your anxiety levels will drop. Right? Go away from the questions. Third thing, come back to the questions and categorize them, or all categorize the questions. If you have a list of 100 questions, are 50 of them about how? Are 50 of them about why? Are 25 of them about what's next, right? So categorize your questions into, okay, so a lot of my questions are around how questions. A lot of my questions are around why questions. My questions are divided into how, why, who, what next. You can categorize them into, my questions are directional questions. My questions are meaning and purpose questions. Like, start looking at the questions and then devise a category system. What type of questions are these? Right? So that if you had to divide the questions into categories, what are the categories? And then put those questions in those categories. Now, you may have to do this, come back to it, think about it, look at the questions, go away, think about the categories, come back to the questions. Does it make sense? Right? Because once you begin to categorize the questions that you have, then you can begin to categorize the data that you actually are looking for. Here's what I mean. The category of questions influences the data that you're looking for. So when you look at it and it's like, oh wow, and you do this, if you get into the habit of doing this, you'll see I get overwhelmed with this category of questions because I have an emotional tie to that. What is my emotional tie to this category of question? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I convincing myself? What lie am I believing concerning this category of question? because that will help you sift through how you're feeling to find the clarity. Okay. Questions can be overwhelming. I totally get it. But there's a way that you can both spiritually and practically sift through your questions to actually see what data is in front of you. And so when you categorize your data as how questions, direction questions, um, process questions, people questions, funding questions, when you begin to categorize those in that way, and then you bring those back to the Lord and say, these are the ones that really give me anxiety, or these are the ones that I could answer this category of question if this category of questions were answered. Then you begin to then you'll begin to be strategic about moving pieces and seeking God and having deeper conversation and asking, asking ask prompts, right? That actually move the needle forward versus keeping you spinning. And that's what I don't want you to do as pioneers. I don't want you spinning. I don't want you spinning. That's not. We don't have time for that. We got stuff to do, and I don't want you spinning out. And so ask questions, categorize your questions. Uh, Pay attention to the feelings that you have regarding those questions. Begin to put on your strategic thinking cap and go, what's the strategy am I seeing? What data and information are these questions providing me? All right. All right. Let me know if that was helpful. Tell me how that was helpful. Tell me what new questions or what ahas that opened up for you. And I will see you next time. Bye now.